Iniciamos entonces este seminario de tendencias actuales en el derecho de la propiedad intelectual y de la publicidad con el keynote speaker de esta mañana. Él es Brian G. Murphy. Él trabaja en Frankfurt, Kurnit, Klein and Selz. Es miembro de Gala, a quien permito convocar y darle el uso de la palabra para que nos dé su discurso, por favor. Please, Brian.
Gracias. Ya estamos. ¿Mejor? ¿Me puedes oír? Sí. Ok. Gracias CONCAMIN, gracias Gala, gracias Arochi&Lindner, especialmente Roberto y José Antonio. Es un honor estar aquí con ustedes y dar esta presentación, pero ojalá que pudiera dar la presentación en español, pero you will see very soon that my wishes and my desires are not as good as my Spanish. So I'm going to continue in English. I'm very sorry. So what I wanted to do today in talking to you, I was looking at the program, and there are so many amazing topics that we're going to learn about today. And why I love to come to Mexico City in particular, but anywhere outside of America, is I love to learn how other countries, how lawyers in other countries, how legislators in other countries are thinking about issues. So I very much look forward to learning. And I very much look forward to learning a lot about some of the topics that I'm going to touch on very briefly today. So my remarks are really about sort of like a big picture, to talk about creativity and authorship and what it means in 2023. And when I say 2023, we are living in a very different era today. We're living in a more or less post-COVID era. We're living in the era of the metaverse. We're living in the world of ChatGPT and all of these other things that we don't even know that are changing our lives and changing the way that people are harnessing creativity, the way that people are writing, the way that people are creating visual arts, the way that people are creating music and films. And so I wanted to share with you some observations that I have about this. And so let me begin by saying, as a disclaimer, we're lawyers, we're advertising lawyers, we love disclaimers. My dream has always been to be a writer. I thought that when I was young, I would write the great American novel. But you know what? I'm too lazy and I haven't done it yet. My other dream was to be a visual artist, but I have absolutely no skills. But my real dream was to be a singer-songwriter, to be a rock star. And when I say a singer-songwriter rock star, what I really mean is what I wanted more than anything else in this world was to be Madonna. By the way, look at this. But this is my reality, let's face it. I'm a lawyer, and look, I'm a very happy lawyer. And one of the things, and I hope other people in this room feel this way, we get to work with unbelievable clients that are doing amazing things. We wrestle with legal issues that are so incredibly interesting and difficult. And I do think that the world has changed so much. So the truth is, we're all authors. We're all writers. We're all creators. We're all directors. And that's been facilitated for a bunch of reasons. And these reasons aren't really new. We've been living with this for a long time. You know, one of the things about being an intellectual property lawyer, working in the advertising law space and the entertainment law space, is that the law is changing so much and so quickly. The job that I have today is not the same job I had 5 years ago, and it wasn't the same job 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It changes so much because technology is driving creativity in fundamental ways. Again, it is not new. It has always been that way, and technology has always challenged intellectual property law, copyright law in particular, but I'm going to talk about examples of that today. Technology has also facilitated collaboration. The way that we collaborate in spaces together, just the way that people use Google Docs to create documents in a lawyer's world, is a small example of the way that collaboration across the creative arts has changed things. It used to be that Mozart would go into his room and he would write songs, maybe in front of the piano, and it was Mozart. How many authors do you think, how many composers wrote the latest Nicki Minaj song? Probably 12. We collaborate, again, facilitated by technology, but this presents some interesting legal issues. And the last issue is also not new, but also driven and accentuated by technology, and it's inspiration. Every artist stands on the shoulders of the giants that came before him, her, or them. We are all indebted to Cervantes, to Shakespeare, to cave art. All art builds on other art. Creative people say inspiration. We lawyers say appropriation, and we sometimes say infringement. These challenges also are not new, but I think that the metaverse and bots are changing and challenging us to think about these issues in brand new ways. So I've got 3 developments that I want to very quickly and very briefly touch upon and share with you some thoughts on. And some of these will be picked up, I'm sure, in some of the other presentations that are happening. So the first question is, and just as a raise of hands, how many people have used some kind of AI, generative tool like ChatGPT or anything? I'm seeing lots and lots of hands. That's good. Because it's a lot of fun and it's scary. Who are the authors in this technology? And this is one of the many, many questions that we're going to have to think about. And I want to share with you some very early ideas, at least from the United States Copyright Office's perspective, of how these issues are going to be thought about. The rule right now in the United States is only human beings, seres humanos, only they can be authors. Monkeys cannot be authors. There's a theory that if you put a typewriter in a cage with a monkey and you leave it there long enough, eventually they'll be able to write a poem. But there have been attempts to register copyrights written by animals, and our Copyright Office says no. Spirits. If the Holy Spirit comes into my body right now and I write a gospel, which is not going to happen, by the way, I could not get a copyright in the name of the Holy Spirit. The Copyright Office has rejected those attempts. Nature. The beautiful things that nature creates. Believe it or not, someone has tried to get a copyright in the name of Mother Nature. No, it has to be human. Software is a little more complicated, though. All of us use software all the time to create. We use Word. We use Microsoft PowerPoint. Some of us who are more sophisticated can use Adobe. And there's a tremendous amount of human interaction with that technology, resulting in creativity. Remember, I said I want to be an artist. I have tried to use Adobe. It's too hard. I want something a little easier. And guess what? I found it. So some of the most interesting tools that are out there it's like TikTok. You can fall into a TikTok hole for hours. You can also fall into a ChatGPT, or the one I want to talk about today is Midjourney, which is another one of the visual creative tools that uses artificial intelligence to allow you to create all kinds of things. So this is the prompt, and the way the tool works is you give it in verbs, in language, prompts of what you want it to draw. So what I wrote was, I wanted a Morky dog traveling to Mexico City with a suitcase in one paw and a US flag in the other paw in the style of a pop artist. That was the instruction I gave. Now some of you are probably saying, what is a Morky? That's my dog. That is a Maltese Yorkshire Terrier mix, one of the best creatures on the entire planet. This is the first iteration that Midjourney came up with. I don't know what your reaction to is. Now, I didn't go too much further because you can continue to use the tool to enhance and change and build upon it. But that gives you an idea of what we're talking about and how quickly, in less than 30 seconds, I was able to create something that I could never create. Now, how is it doing it? Of course, it's using machine learning, algorithms, and internet scraping to pull images from the internet and create that image. That raises all kinds of issues. Now, other people have done a better job than I have. And this is the story that I want to tell you about, which is one of the first significant actions we have in the United States that begins to address authorship when you're using these kinds of tools. What you're looking at here is a comic book. It was written by this woman, Christina, And she actually secured a registration in our copyright office for the comic book. On the application, however, she said that she was the author. And it probably looked to the copyright officer who looked at it like a normal, regular registration. However, she used Midjourney, the program that I used to create my art, to create the artwork that was in the comic book. Now, perhaps she could have been a little clearer about this in her application, but if you look up at the upper right-hand corner, she did give credit on the book to herself and to Midjourney. Now, what happened next? She had a registration. Well, she started doing something that maybe was a little foolish. She started bragging about her registration on social media. The Copyright Office took notice and re-examined the application. There was back and forth between her lawyers and our Copyright Office. And basically what they did is they withdrew the original registration and they looked at it more carefully and they put some thought into what does authorship mean in this context where she used the tool to create her comic book. Part of it was easy. This is a comic book. It's very visual, but there's also text. And she wrote all of the text, she says, herself. The Copyright Office said that there is a copyright in the text. That is not controversial. She also assembled the different images that the tool, that Midjourney gave her, into we call it selection and arrangement under US copyright law. And the Copyright Office said that there is a copyright in the way that you assembled the pieces. But what the Copyright Office said was there is not a copyright in the artwork itself, because that was created by a computer program and not by you. And the crux of what the Copyright Office's concern was that when you're using these tools, it is not a human being endeavoring in the effort to create, to be the originator, to be the one that is actually doing the work. It is being done by a tool. And it's also being done by a tool where the results are completely random. And that's very different than someone who is using Adobe Illustrator, for example. That human being, artist, using a tool like Adobe, using Photoshop, they are in charge. They are in control. And while they may end up creating some visual things they didn't expect using those tools, they are still the primary mover. And that is what the Copyright Office seems to be looking at. So the very first instance in the United States of thinking about these issues is focusing on the contributions made by the human being to the technology that's being used. Now, what does all this mean? There's one other case that I will tell you about. There's a lawsuit that's going on in the United States that's challenging another application and rejection with a different tool that was used to create this visual image. And in that court case, which is a very early case, it was only filed recently, what the plaintiff, which is the human being who used the software to create that image, he's arguing, come on, Copyright Office, we're living in the age of the metaverse. Wake up. This is no different than the fiction that we use that a company can own a copyright. Companies in the United States, and I think in Mexico, can be copyright owners. Non-humans can own copyrights. Why is it any different when a machine owns it? And also, it's also time that we start thinking about what is the fundamental policy of copyright law. It is to augment and create and incentivize creation. We'll talk about that more in a second. And to give copyright protection for these images actually furthers that important policy goal. So both as a matter of policy, as a matter of precedent, this litigant, this plaintiff, this artist is arguing we should do better and we should come into the 21st century. Now, there's so many questions. So many questions of who is the creator? How much human being effort has to be involved? How much does it mean that that artwork is owned by nobody? Putting aside the copyright and the various input components that are there. And I don't have time to talk about all of the legal issues that are presented by these kinds of tools, both on the input or training mode, the scraping and scouring of the internet, the taking of those images, the repurposing of them. Is it copyright infringement? Does it violate the terms of service of websites? Is there copyright preemption? So many issues. There's also issues on the outside, on the output side. When you compare and look at that output, in my example, I wouldn't be surprised if some of that output was recognizably from copyrighted images owned by someone else. Can there be infringement on that side? And if there is infringement, is it my fault because I created the image? The answer is no, fair use. But that's because I'm here. What if I were using it for a commercial project? No one knows the answer to any of these questions. I can't wait to find out, though. I can't wait to explore it. Is any of this any good? Some of it, I don't know. I just saw this in the Times on my way down here yesterday. I don't know how many of you watched MASH. You're too young to have watched it. That American show. It was a great show in its time. The two lead actors did a reading, last week, of a script written for their characters by ChatGPT. And they found it very lackluster. It wasn't funny, it wasn't good. But that's going to change. I think this stuff is going to get better and better and better. And it's going to present opportunities and, of course, challenges. And here's the thing. This is lovely. I love being a geek. I love thinking about these issues. I love wondering who owns the copyright. Is it infringement? Are there privacy issues? I love talking to clients about this. But we are missing the ball. It is not about that. How many of you watched Battlestar Galactica? This is what we need to be worried about because these chatbots are going to take over the world, and it is not pretty. If you haven't watched this series, it has aged very well. I recommend it. Go watch it. Okay. The second thing I want to talk about is collaboration and the way that we collaborate in this creative world where there are so many different ways and so many different tools that we can do that. And this is going to bring us to something much more pedestrian, our cell phones. How many of you today said to somebody, will you take a photo of me right now, and you hand them your cell phone? And they're standing there, and I'm standing here. They take the picture, they give you that phone back, and what do you do next? You post it on LinkedIn. Who owns that photo? Well, that's one of those questions that we now have a case on in the United States. See this guy on the left? That's our plaintiff. His name is Mr. Shaw. He lived in Hollywood. You know what his dream was in Hollywood? To be an actor. That's everybody's dream. Did he have success? No. So what did he do when he didn't have success? Well, let's see. He could have worked at Starbucks. He could have gone to law school. He could have done a million things. Instead, what he did is he started sending extortion notices to rich and famous people, including at the time Harvey Weinstein, which is incredible, before he was in jail, demanding millions of dollars or he would kidnap their children. This is an advertising conference. What I love is that he put a disclaimer right at the top, extortion notice. The FBI caught him. He went to jail. He got out of jail. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of publicity about his trial because when he was being an actor, he got his picture taken with many, many famous pictures, with many, many famous people. And of course, the articles about his trial, about his conviction, used those illustrations. Why wouldn't they? He wasn't happy when he got out of prison and he saw that. And so what he tried to do was use copyright as a sword to get all of the publications, well, really to sue them for money, as well as to get them to stop using those photos, because he probably was trying to clean up his profile. So this also raises the question that I raised for you, the question that we're copyright lawyers, and maybe some of us haven't really focused on this enough. Who is the author of the photos that were taken there? Well, it clearly was not him, because he was in the photos. Someone else pushed the button. Is that what authorship is about? Is authorship about pushing a button? And by the way, what is really protectable in a photograph like that? That's just a mundane photo of me standing on a stage that someone just took. Is there creativity that's worthy of copyright protection? Maybe very thin copyright protection? Very, very interesting issues. Maybe it's a work that they created together. I don't know about you, but when my mother asks me to take a picture of her, she art directs me. She looks at it, she disapproves, and she tells me to do it again. Maybe my mother and I Are joint creators, joint authors, owners of a joint work under US copyright law? Maybe yes, maybe no. What about the fact that everyone in this circumstance knew what the situation was? Maybe there was an implied license there, that the person who took the photo understood that I would post it on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok. But what if I licensed it for use in a news article or put it on merchandise or in a print ad? Is that beyond the terms of an implied license that no one ever discussed? I don't know. He also argued there was a transfer of ownership, that when I handed back the phone to you, a phone that you paid a lot of money for, a phone that you own, where you told me to take the photo, you're not my employee, maybe that was a transfer of ownership. Well, the answer in the court that the court gave in this case was the copyright was not owned by this person and could quickly dismiss the case. But I actually think that this issue could be litigated much more substantially by anyone in this room who could make thoughtful, interesting arguments about how to think about that kind of ownership. And this may be a silly example, but it's a prevalent example. And there are many, many other ways that we are collaborating on creativity. And we're not necessarily looking as carefully at them as we will need to be as time goes on. And here's my last topic. Not a new topic, but one that's been driven by technology. Appropriation. So to talk about this, and I could talk about this topic for 12 hours, but they didn't give me 12 hours, so I won't. But this is the topic of fair use under US copyright law. And I know that things are different here in Mexico and in the other countries, and some of the other countries that are represented by some of you here. I want to talk to you about an extremely important case that is happening right now in the United States Supreme Court. You may be aware of it, and I can give you some predictions. But first, to understand the way that we look at copyright law, I'm going to explain copyright law to you with emojis, as I've done with everything else in this presentation. United States copyright law is really a bargain. Ganga? Or is that a different kind of bargain? Okay, I don't know. And it's a bargain based on incentives. And the idea is copyright protection is a carrot to incentivize creators by giving them a monopoly for a limited period of time, that they get to enjoy the fruits of their labor, that they get to profit off of and exploit all of the copyrighted works. But the beneficiaries of that bargain are not the writer. It is not Steven Spielberg. It is not Sony Interactive. It is not Cardi B. It is all of us in society. The incentive is to promote the creativity so we can all learn, enjoy, experience culture and art. And that is a fundamental part of the bargain. Now, what that also means, remember as I started this, I talked about inspiration being the seed of all art. When you look at someone like Shakespeare, he based every one of his major plays on works that belonged to someone else. He created based on being inspired by others. So our copyright law recognizes a balance. And what you're trying to do is incentivize me to get off the couch and write something so I have protection, but not protect it so much that I own the field, that I'm the only one who can do something. We want the Walt Disney Company to take Snow White and create a new Snow White. And then we want someone else to create their own version of Snow White. So society is benefiting from having more creative production. Without getting too far into the weeds, there's a multi-pronged approach that courts in the United States take to what is fair use. We have a statute which lists and enumerates certain things courts are supposed to look at and certain examples, and we have hundreds of years of case law. And any copyright lawyer who is honest will tell you that our case law is all over the place. And it is very, very hard to predict, in many instances, whether something is in fact a fair use. And what it really turns on often is this word that we use, which is transformative. And what we mean by transformative under copyright law is, did the second creator take the work from the original person, the plaintiff, and use it as inspiration to create something new, something that is worthwhile, something that is not for the same purpose,
that is not likely to be a competitive substitute. Something that, in fact, is going to further that very policy that I mentioned before about that copyright is built on, which is fundamental, which is creating more creative productions out there for all of us to enjoy. And this is the case that we are all waiting for, and it involves Prince. The artist who is known as Prince was notoriously shy. He sat for a photo shoot in 1981 with a photographer, who is the plaintiff in this case. Her name is Goldsmith, and they took this picture. That picture was then licensed by Vanity Fair, the magazine, to create an illustration done by Andy Warhol, obviously before he died, and it was used to illustrate in 1984. There was a license to create that image. Andy Warhol, without a license, went out and created something called the Prince series. I don't think anyone in this room owns an original one of these. They hang in museums. If you owned one, you wouldn't be here because they're worth $20 million, $30 million, $40 million. Collectors, museums own them. And when Prince died, Vanity Fair used a different version of the same art, but they never went back to the original photographer. She found out about it, and she has now sued, or actually, the Andy Warhol estate sued her, seeking a declaration that what Andy Warhol did here was not copyright infringement, but was fair use. I'm actually very curious, if this were a case happening in Mexico or whatever country you're from, how many of you would think this is a major problem? Copyright infringement. The majority of the room is raising their hands. But it's Andy Warhol. We all benefit from Andy Warhol having created this. And this is the case that we're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide. The trial court, our lower court, said this was fair use. The appellate court said this was not fair use, to use it as an illustration on a magazine cover. And we're waiting for our Supreme Court to rule and provide some guidance. This is interesting for many reasons. It's relevant to art, clearly, fine art. It's relevant to all kinds of creative industries, but it's relevant to everyone in this room who practices at all in any kind of creative field that touches America, because that touches the United States. Because these issues, oops, sorry, wrong direction. I'm gonna skip through these. These are very, very pretty, but you don't need to see those. It is something that is going to impact, depending on what the Supreme Court does, possibly impact the way that we look at these issues going forward. It'll be something that news organizations, book publishers, documentary filmmakers, other filmmakers, musicians, songwriters will have to pay very, very close attention to. I will say that this case is largely about using the image on a magazine cover. The court said this was not about the version that is hanging at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But it depends what they say, doesn't it? Courts say things, and then we lawyers begin to interpret them, and we interpret them, and we interpret them, and they build. Because we lawyers also stand on the shoulders of the giant, of the better lawyers who were before us, as well as a precedent. Conclusions? I have literally no conclusions. I have no idea where this is going. Absolutely none. I think that I had a really interesting conversation yesterday, I'm not going to mention names, with someone who's in this room, and that someone admitted that they have used ChatGPT not to write legal briefs, but to check themselves, to use it sort of the way you would use Google, to see what kind of information you could get that would enhance the work that they were doing. I actually haven't done that. It never occurred to me to do that. I've been having too much fun writing stupid things with ChatGPT. But it may be a tool that, it clearly is a tool that has many, many good uses. It clearly is a tool, all of those tools, that have many, many uses that are going to present really very, very difficult issues for us to think about. And I will leave you with one other thought. I don't know how many of you have children that are 12, 6, 10, 18, it doesn't matter. They're children. They will grow up not knowing what life is without these tools. They will someday be in charge. Not when I'm alive, but the next generation will be in charge. And they will be rewriting and rethinking all of these rules. And that, to me, is going to be very interesting. Because they will think about the balance that we're trying to create in a very different way that I think about it, and a very different way that some of you who are younger than I am will think about it. And I think that that is what the future will have in hold for us. I have one other thing. I'm an author, too. And the most important thing I want to say to you is please follow me on LinkedIn because I'm trying to get more followers than Jeff. And I haven't succeeded yet, but it would be really, really make me super happy if that happened. So right now, I'm going to leave this up for right now. Hurry, hurry. I'm actually not joking. I'm not leaving until you do it. I'm not seeing cameras. One more. One. Come on. Come on. Hostage. Holding you hostage. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Clicker. Put the clicker.
Bueno, gracias Brian por esta presentación. Es muy importante que les diga que en el año 2018 nombraron a Brian como abogado del año en Derecho de la Publicidad. Los Best Lawyers in America lo nombraron abogado del año. Entonces, yo la verdad es que los invito a acercarse a él, porque él como socio de Frankfurt, Kurnit, Klein and Selz lleva a cabo diversas labores de consultoría para agencias de publicidad, para anunciantes, para compañías de la industria del entretenimiento, y él específicamente se enfoca en derechos de autor, en marcas, en derecho de la imagen, en competencia desleal y en publicidad engañosa. Entonces hay que aprovechar toda la experiencia que él tiene. Él imparte cursos de entretenimiento, de derechos de autor, de propiedad intelectual en escuelas de Derecho de la Universidad de Fordham y la Universidad de Nueva York. Entonces hay que tomar, la verdad, la oportunidad de platicar con él, de acercarse y pues de intercambiar algunas ideas. Yo creo que esto va a ser muy benéfico para todos ustedes. Entonces, nuevamente les pido un fuerte aplauso para Brian, por favor.